Hi, I was asked if I would walk you through a problem from Chapter 10, and it's problem 5, which has to do with cost and benefit analysis. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you, and then we will walk through this particular program. Okay, let me do this from beginning. There we go. Okay, so in this particular problem, it says, suppose that the government wants to reduce total pollution emitted by 3 local firms. So we have 3 local firms. Currently, they have 4 units of pollution in the area for a total of 12. 4 times 3 is 12. If the government wants to reduce total pollution in the area to 6 units, it can choose between the 2 methods. Government sets pollution standards using regulation or tradable pollution permits. Each firm faces different costs, and the table illustrates the cost of reducing pollution. So here we have our first unit of pollution, our second unit of pollution, and our third unit of pollution. Okay, at this point, what you might want to do is to take a look at what are the total costs for doing this. And I think I'm going to read on and see what the next slide has to ask us. The first government employee suggests limiting pollution through regulation. To meet the pollution goal, the government requires each to reduce its pollution by 2 units. So I'm going to go up and pick up some of this information. So what we want to do is to calculate to reduce pollution, the first unit and the second unit, from each of these firm X, Y, and Z. So we would end up with 130 times 1 plus 165 times 1. Okay, go ahead and bracket that. And that would give us an answer of 295. Okay, again, I'm going to do the same thing for Y. I'm going to say 90 times 1, 115 times 1, add those 2 together, and I would get 205. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing for Z times 1 times 1, and I would end up with 1350. Okay, so these are the numbers that I'm going to be using in the next slide, the 295, the 205, and the 1305. So for firm X, it's going to be 295. For firm Y, it's going to be 205. And for firm Z, it's going to be 1305. These are going to be the numbers that we're going to compare in our cost-benefit analysis when we kind of move into the next part of the problem. Okay. Meanwhile, another employee has a different strategy, and they want to use tradable pollution permits. So each permit allows for 1 unit of pollution. They're free to trade with one another as long as they can get an agreed upon price. For X agrees to sell a permit to Y at an agreed upon price, then firm Y would end up with permits needing to reduce its pollution only by 1. X would end up with only 1 permit and have to reduce its pollution by 3. Okay, so firm Z has the highest pollution cost. Yes, we already know that because we calculated it, and their pollution costs are $13.50. It thinks it might be better off buying a permit from firm Y and a permit from firm X so it doesn't have to reduce its own pollution. Okay, at which of the following prices would firm Y be willing to sell one of its permits to Z, but not firm X? And then we need to check all that apply. So what we need here is the information from the previous screen. X is equal to 295. Y is equal to 205. So we're kind of looking for numbers in this span. So 123. So that's going to be our benefit. These are our costs. So what essentially we're doing is doing a cost versus benefit for each of the firms, specifically X and Y. So if their cost is $295 and they can only benefit from this $123, They would say no, right? And so again, I'm using X here as their costs. 295 is greater than 212, so that's a no. 295 is greater than 219, so that's a no. And then it's only until we get into the 569 range and greater that the actual benefit of this is greater than the cost. Wait a minute, I need to erase that because I made a mistake. So sometimes I just think a little bit more than the hand doesn't move as quick as what the mind does. So 295, the cost, and we're going to say that the benefit of that is going to be greater at 569. So that becomes a yes. 595 obviously becomes a yes as well. So now what we're going to do is take a look at Y and do the same thing and look at the cost versus the benefit. Okay. Their cost is 205. The benefit that they can get from selling one of these is 123. So they are also a no here. At their cost 205, 212, that's a yes because the benefit is greater than the cost. 205 and 219, that becomes a yes. And so I'm going to go back to the problem and I'm going to ask, okay, what am I looking for? Y is willing to sell at 205, at 212 and 219. X is not at 212 and 219. So my answer here would be 212 and 219. It's anything that one will agree to where the other one will not. Okay. Now's where it gets a little more interesting. So now the government sets a price of $218, and we're going to also kind of do this cost-benefit analysis as well. This is where it gets very confusing, I think. Basically, it's saying that you want to use the units of pollution that we've previously calculated and then decide whether or not they're going to sell their pollution permit, or if they're going to buy, or if they're going to remain stable. So at this part of the problem is where we want to take a look at, okay, so what's the cost? I'm going to make a little cost here, and we're going to use the cost that we previously calculated. And then what's the benefit? And the benefit is going to be the 218 that they gave us in the problem. Okay, so let's do X first. And X has units of pollution are 2, so that gives us a cost of 295. The benefit, meaning selling the pollution permit, 295 is greater than 218. So they are not going to sell it. They're going to say no. And so their action is no action. They're neither going to buy nor sell. So now we want to get to this is also a little, in my opinion, a little confusing. The final amount of pollution eliminated. So they started off with 4 at the original state. They're going to use the 2 that are provided by the government. So what is their final amount of pollution? And that's where I think if you get rid of that word eliminated, it might help. And that ends up being 2. So we're going to put a 2 here. And we know, because we calculated in the previous slides, that we know the cost of pollution at 2 units, the total is 295. And if you don't remember where we got that 295, go back and take a look at those 2 slides. But basically, the 295 comes from the fact that, if you look back here, that's the 130, write that 130 for the first unit of pollution and the 165 for the second unit of pollution, and that gives us the 295. So that's where that came from. Okay, firm Y. We're going to look at their cost. So for 2 units of pollution, it's 205. That's their cost. Their benefit is 218. So I would much rather have $218 than lose 205 because the 218 is greater. They are willing to sell 1 permit. Okay, now, so their action is sell 1. And now we're going to look at how this one is calculated. So basically, again, starting off with, we started off with 4. We're going to use 2, and we're going to sell 1. So the net effect of that is 4 minus 2 is 2.
Okay, I'm trying to remember how I calculated this.
Oh, 3, yeah. Okay, so looking at the -2 and -1, that's a 3. So 3 here, because we're using this and we're selling this. So basically that is 3 pollution permits. Okay, now how much is that? Again, going back to our original slide, this is going to be 345. How do we get 345? So I'm going to bring that over there. And the 345 we get from the 90 for the first pollution, the 115 for the second, plus the 140 for the third, and that ends up being 345. So that's where that number came from. Firm Z, we know, has the highest cost of pollution. And when we look at firm Z, we're going to say, okay, let's get their cost benefit. I'm going to erase some of this because it might get confusing. So let me go ahead and erase for everybody but Z. Maybe I'll just write those in there again. Okay, so the action here is no action. This is going to be 2 because they're going to stay where they're at. Cost of reducing pollution was $295. This is going to be a sell 1 permit. So a 3 here because they're using 2 and selling 1, and that's going to be $345. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at the cost versus the benefit of Z. So for Z, the cost versus the benefit, and again, the benefit is this $218 given to us up here in the problem. Okay, so their cost of reducing is $13.50 for 2 units of pollution, so $13.50. And the benefit that they get is $218. Because $350 is greater than $218, they're going to want to buy a permit. So they're going to buy 1. Here's your double check. Make sure that if you have a sell, you have a buy. That's kind of the important part of this particular problem. Okay, so how are we going to figure out the final amount of pollution eliminated for Z? So what we're going to do here for Z is we're going to say, okay, they had 4, they're using 2, and they're buying 1. So 4 minus 2 is 2, minus 1. So we look at this side of it, -2 plus 1, that gives us 1. Again, because they use and then buy. Okay, so what I'm saying is just look at the action after the 4, what's happening, -2 plus 1, we end up with -1, but we don't want a negative here, we just want the 1. Okay, so what was the cost of that? So we go ahead and look back at our table, and if you look back at the table, let me see if I can do this. Yeah, we can. The very first table that we saw here, we saw that Z, right, has the first unit of pollution is 600. So what I want to do then is to take that number, that 600, and that's what I'm going to write right here, 600. Okay, another double check take a look at how many total pollution we have. Remember, we were starting with 12 and we wanted to get to 6. So 2 and 3 are 5, plus 1 is 6. So 6, that accomplishes our goal. Hopefully that makes sense to you. It's a little wonky when you talk about that final amount of pollution. Okay, so here they're asking us what is the cost of eliminating the pollution in both scenarios. And so when we look at that, what we want to do is to just simply add up all of the costs under the two scenarios. So I ended up with 1805 for regulation. And how did I get the 1805? The 1805 came from, there we go. I got to come back to my originals here. The 1805 came from the 295 plus the 205 plus the 1350. Okay, where did I get those numbers? Again, kind of going back in the problem, I just simply added up under the regulation method 1. I just summed these, and that's what I ended up with for this last one, 1805. For tradable pollution permits, what I'm going to do now is go to the slide here, and I'm just going to add those up and sum them. So when I do that, I end up with 1240. Yeah, 1240. Okay, 1,240. Where did that come from? That was the 295 from the previous slide, plus the 345, plus the 600. Okay, so you can conclude that eliminating pollution is less costly to society when the government, I'm sorry, I should have read the question. It's actually more costly. It's always going to be less costly when we use marketable pollution permits. So that's just a kind of a clue there. If it's asking you, in this case, they're asking us about when the government regulates. Government regulation is always going to be more expensive. That's just kind of pat answer for this. So we can conclude that when the government regulates each firm to eliminate, then when it wants to allocate permits that can be bought and sold, it is more costly to society to use regulation. So here, just a double check is, if they're using regulation, that's always going to be more costly. And then permits are always less costly. Okay, hopefully that will help you answer this question. And I think I answered them all. Yep, I sure did. So let me go ahead and stop my share there. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me. We have some family things going on right now. So, but I will get back with you within the day or the following day, within 24 hours. Thanks. Have a great day and stay safe. Be well.